Right, so while some might find comparing a massacre of Gazans to what happened to Donald Trump a little contentious, this is more condemnation and media reaction to two incidents, both of which absolutely do deserve condemnation. But one of these stories is naturally getting a huge amount of attention, whereas the other absolutely isn't. And for me, this is a matter of perspective, given both are developing stories. An assassination attempt, if legitimate, is a serious matter, but ultimately we have one Nick Deer versus Gazan people, innocent Gazan people, in a safe zone, designated as such by Israel, being bombed because Israel's word is worthless and Netanyahu is an absolute monster. The US is at the heart of both of these stories, after all. And when you're going to hear about Trump's ear by all and sundry all day long, probably longer, depending on how much he milks it for political gain, because you know he will, the other story you might not have heard about at all. And if we're going to talk about sheer scale of bloodshed and things that we find unacceptable, then the fact one story is going to get a lot more press than the other is what fundamentally at the end of the day really is unacceptable. Right, so dominating social media today is news that Donald Trump has been shot, and this is manna from heaven for right-wing media outlets. This will give them something to talk about for days. But Trump aside, one person died and two are critically injured from the shooting as shots were fired shortly after Trump stood up to address a Pennsylvania gathering of the masses. Trump was incredibly lucky that a bullet only grazed his ear. Let's not talk about this in terms of a setup at this point, because one person died in the shooting and the shooter himself, a 20-year-old kid by all accounts, was also killed. Frankly, if this was a setup, it went horribly wrong, and if Trump is so desperate for political gain he would go to such lengths, would do such a thing, then his mental state, frankly, is even more questionable than Genocide Joe's. I do not wish to believe that. I don't at this point believe that, and frankly, you're only really giving the right wing an excuse to attack the left to make such an assumption, when actually a period of self-reflection is in order on all sides. Trump was shot at after he had incited an insurrection, of course. The US right wing are massively in hock to the gun lobby as well, and the shooter was apparently wearing a t-shirt related to a YouTube channel called Demolition Ranch, a firearms channel. Some at the scene, and this is the reality of why I say don't deal in conspiracy theories before facts are known, and they aren't yet, blamed Biden and CNN for the shooting. It's those pesky liberals to blame, not us on the right wing, but we're going to hear plenty about this in the coming days as more facts become known, as the investigation takes place. Yet that doesn't stop people from making foolish comments, stupid comments, which give rise to such people pointing at centrists, pointing at the left. But pointing out the difference between the left and centrists is easily enough done when you look at how they actually get treated differently. For example, BBC Radio 4 presenter and centrist dad David Aronovich tweeted out that Biden should kill Trump after Trump was handed presidential immunity by the US Supreme Court. If Aronovich had been a lefty, he'd have been sacked. He instead, after deleting that, claimed it was satire, though satire is, of course, meant to actually be funny. Whilst on the subject of the left, though, where people are reacting with a mix of horror and debating whether this was a setup or whether it was genuine or whatever, Trump's fist in the air moment afterwards, which I thought was a little unusual. You would expect the bodyguards to be carting him off and out of the way as fast as possible. His fist in the air moment after, though. Expect to see that on a t-shirt soon enough, no doubt. He'll cash in on that, absolutely. A bit like the mugshot photo. But I'm reminded also of the attempt to kill Jeremy Corbyn in 2018, the Finsbury Road Mosque. And then this moment where he was hit in the head by a man whilst holding an egg, and the jeering and the mockery that followed that from the media. And then there was the photographs of the soldiers using pictures of Corbyn for target practice. And then it all becomes a question of where exactly the moral compass of those virtue signalling over Trump actually lies. Case in point is Nigel Farage, where it comes to this country and the UK reaction, because of course our mainstream media have asked for his view, blaming, predictably, the left for the attack on Trump. Trump will milk this for all he's worth, because this is him. He once said he could stand in Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and he wouldn't lose voters because this is the sort of man he is. But that doesn't take away from the fact a shooting did take place. The scale of that shooting and the scale of the media attention is where I have beef with, where the central tenet of this video lies. Because at the same time all of this was happening, was bearing out, we were already witnessing an absolute massacre taking place at Israeli hands against innocent civilian Gazans in an area Israel itself had designated as safe, and was actually sending these people to. The attacks on the Gazan coastal area of al-Mawasi have shocked and appalled people where they've heard about it, of our media. The Guardian put a piece out, and there's a small bit on the BBC website, but that's it at time of writing, and that in itself really does say a lot. The claim from Israeli officials is that they were targeting the head of Hamas's military wing, Mohammed Deif, the head of the al-Qassam brigades, those Hamas operatives engaged in the actual fighting. So taking him out would of course be a hugely symbolic victory for Israel and a huge setback for Hamas. None of this conducive towards getting a peace deal at all, though it isn't Deif blocking that as such, it's Netanyahu. But I went into the detail of that in a video yesterday, so I'm not going to go back into that again here. But there is a bit to add to that, which I'll come on to in a moment. However, there is targeting someone for an attack, and there is just dropping a shed load of bombs on a tented community in an area you designated as safe. Because Israel's alleged targeting of Deif amounted to just that. 92 innocent people actually ended up being killed, hundreds more injured, mainly women and children, again, as usual, because they are the majority of the civilians in the Gaza Strip, and Israel isn't even certain that Deif is amongst the people that they've killed. And that comes not least from the fact that Hamas have stated that Deif wasn't even there. In fact, it is just as conceivable this was merely the excuse Israel have used to cover up the fact they have targeted an area full of civilians that they literally had sent there. Given that we now know that Netanyahu has been actively working to wreck any attempt at a peace deal for the last 6 months, again I'm not going to go back into this because I covered it in a video yesterday, but attacking civilians is certainly one way of ensuring peace talks get ended for good, and he can now blame Hamas for that, because despite his own actions following this massacre in al-mawasi, Hamas have now formally withdrawn from all negotiations. Here's what France 24 have said in their coverage. A senior Hamas official told AFP Sunday that the Palestinian militant group has withdrawn from talks on a ceasefire in the Gaza war because of Israeli massacres and its attitude in negotiations. Another Hamas official said the group's military leader Mohammed Deif was fine and working despite Israel's airstrike on a southern Gaza camp that it said targeted the wanted Hamas commander on Saturday. Gaza's health ministry said the attack left 92 dead. Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh told international mediators Qatar and Egypt of the end of the talks on a ceasefire plan first outlined by US President Joe Biden in May, according to the senior official. The first phase of the deal would have seen a 6-week ceasefire with the exchange of most hostages taken in Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel for Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. Haniyeh said Hamas would halt negotiations due to the occupations, Israel, lack of seriousness, continued policy of procrastination and obstruction, and the ongoing massacres against unarmed civilians, according to the official. Hamas has shown great flexibility to reach an agreement and end the aggression, and is ready to resume negotiations when the occupation government demonstrates seriousness in reaching a ceasefire agreement and a prisoner exchange deal. Haniyeh said in a statement late Saturday that he had called the mediators and other countries to urge them to put pressure on Israel to halt the attacks. Well, I can't say I blame them, all things considered, can you? Netanyahu doesn't want peace. He will tell foreign mediators from the US to Qatar or Egypt that he does, but when Israeli papers themselves are saying exactly what the likes of Ismail Haniyeh has said in that France 24 piece, who do you end up believing more? It's not Netanyahu, surely, is it? It isn't Israel, and that's been the case for most of this conflict. There is no desire on Israel's part to end this, when all that actually concerns Netanyahu is not peace, is not rescuing hostages, it's remaining in power. Remaining in charge of a coalition government where he is completely reliant on the hard right to keep him there. Social media has had its say on this massacre, even if the media is ignoring it. Trade unionist Howard Beckett wrote, "The Israeli airstrikes yesterday in the al-Mawasi region, they said it was a safe zone. Palestinians went there, into tents, to be slaughtered. Netanyahu is a monster. Starmer and Biden support his racist genocide. They are all guilty. The Hague, now." And Lebanese commentator Sarah wrote, "Mass media is more concerned about Trump being shot in the ear than the 400 plus Palestinian civilians murdered and maimed by Israel in Gaza today. Tells you everything you need to know." Well, she hits the nail on the head there, and that is exactly the point of this video, and I'm glad I'm not the only one thinking it. Israeli genocide gets put on the back burner because an American got shot in the ear. The lack of perspective angers me so much, and I hope it does you as well. Meanwhile, as I alluded to in this video, I covered Netanyahu's intentional wrecking of peace processes and negotiations, and that isn't coming from me. That's coming from Israeli paper Haaretz, who have produced a 6-month-long timeline illustrating every instance that it has been Netanyahu himself blocking a route to peace, something that frankly I don't believe can happen whilst he remains in power, because remaining in power is what is driving him. and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.